Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon, State and Local Tax, Navigating a Multi-State Business. Your presenters today are Kim and Karen, and before I turn it over to them, just a few housekeeping items. You can customize what you're seeing on the screen by going to the GoToWebinar screen viewer. You can maximize the webcams, feel like you're in the room with Karen and Kim, or you can maximize the PowerPoint, whichever you prefer. We have two different audio options this afternoon, the computer audio and the phone call option. We do find that the phone call option is a tad bit more reliable as it is not streamed over internet. So if you're having any issues, go ahead and toggle back and forth between the two of those and see if that would fix it for you. You can download the handout that you're viewing that Karen and Kim will walk through today in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel. It will also be sent to you in a follow-up email after the webinar concludes today. Any questions that you have, please drop those into the questions panel as we do not monitor the chat box throughout the presentation. So again, insert those questions in the questions panel, and if we have enough time, we'll do a Q&A session. If not, we'll have Karen and Kim answer those questions offline via email. We will be offering CPE today, so we will have some polls throughout the presentation. So make sure you're answering all of those in order to be eligible for that CPE credit after this presentation concludes. Speaking of CPE, we do use a third party called SimpleCert to distribute our CPE. Please allow a few business days for those to be sent out to you. And if you're not seeing that in your inbox, check your junk and your spam. And if you are still not seeing that, reach out to us and we will mitigate that as quickly as possible. And last but not least, our survey. Our survey will pop up after the webinar concludes. So stick around after we end that meeting and fill out that survey. You can let us know how we did and insert any questions into the survey that we were not able to get to throughout the presentation as well. So without further ado, Karen, Kim, take them away.
Thank you very much, Kaylee, and thank you all for attending our presentation today. First, going to run through the agenda real quick. We're going to talk about some triggers that can create some tax registrations and associated tax issues. Kim's going to take us through the registrations, some solutions, resources, and then finally we're going to wrap it up with some strategies today. So hopefully this is informative for you and you get some good takeaways. And as Kaylee mentioned, if you have any questions, whether it be today, tomorrow, next week, or 3 months from now, feel free to reach out to Kim or I at any time, and hopefully we can assist you with those questions. So before we jump in, I wanted to mention a couple things. And the first thing is a business, are we really allowed to just go operate in a state without any type of authority? Nothing to do with taxes, but really looking at it from maybe a legal perspective. Can businesses just cross state lines and operate without any authority, or maybe kind of like a free-for-all type environment amongst the states, and whether or not we can just do that? We're going to talk about some of that later on in the presentation, but keep that in the back of your mind. It's not always on taxes when it comes to navigating a multi-state business, but it's also, do you have the authority to even be in that state and to operate? So that's one thing I wanted to throw out there real quick. And then the other thing is the heart of this today is, so what is going to trigger the total onslaught of state taxes? And we're really not talking about income taxes, because there's a whole lot of other state taxes that come with this as well. And and also it's based on what we're doing, these triggers, what do the states do? Do the states think that's enough of a connection with their state to be able to tax a business? And so those are some of the things we're going to look at today. And so one of the things is when a state looks at whether or not you have a big enough connection with the state, the old one that we were all familiar with predominantly, and it's always been this year for numbers of years, is the physical presence. And the big thing is well, I don't have a physical presence in that state, I don't have to do anything. But a majority of the states, if not 99.9% of the states, are now looking at an economic presence. And that basically means that you're working with customers or whatever have you in those states, and you really are never stepping foot into those states. So that's really the economic aspect and what states are looking at now in connecting businesses to their states so they have that ability to tax them. And of course, with the taxation comes all these registrations to make sure you can comply correctly. So with further ado, we're going to move on to our triggers. And I think the first and foremost one that we see currently is this whole thing with remote employees, brought on by probably the whole COVID pandemic, but remote employees. So what does a remote employee do for us? Well, first of all, one of the main things is now we got a physical presence in the state, right? The business has a physical presence in the state because now they've hired an employee and they're sitting in that state. So what does that look like for tax purposes, registrations, and then going back to that legal aspect? What does that require us to do? And so first of all, with a remote employee, that's going to create payroll registrations, right? You know, obviously you have an employee, you got to do payroll. So you got a payroll in that state now. Well, most states generally require that if you have a payroll registration in a state, that's going to create an income tax filing requirement for you, or a so-called income tax registration, if that state requires an income tax registration. So, you know, having a remote employee is not just hiring somebody, placing them in the state. You have to be aware of all the things that may come from that remote employee. And we're going to talk about an example later on in the presentation of a remote employee that we've hired in a specific state and what that creates. So without elaborating on that any further, we're going to move on down to the use of an independent contractor. Okay, so you say, Karen, fine, I'm not going to hire a remote employee. I'm not going to have an employee in any of those states, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use an independent contractor, and then I can get out of all of this. Well, that's not going to help you either, because of a use of an independent contractor or an agent that is working on your behalf in a state can also create many things. Okay, same thing with the remote employees. You know, once you have that physical presence in the state, I can tell you one thing, depending on if you're selling services or you sell products, the main thing that's going to trigger a state tax is sales tax. If you have any type of physical presence in a state, you're automatically going to be zapped with sales tax. Okay, so again, sales tax registrations, payroll registrations, potentially income tax registrations, the legal authority to do business in a state with that registration. Moving down to customers. Say we have customers and we have sales revenue, right? We have service revenue. Hey, I'm selling into that state. They can't get me. I don't have employees out there. I don't have anything. But remember, I mentioned about economic, okay, economic connection, okay, based on whether you're selling service revenue or product revenue. The states have gotten pretty savvy with some of their requirements, saying that, well, we may have some sales thresholds that if you surpass those sales thresholds in our state, then that can create an income tax filing requirement. Same thing with a sales tax filing requirement, right? And those are all going to require registrations. So I can have a customer that's in state A and I never go into that state, but they have a sales threshold that if I have more than a certain dollar amount of sales in that state, it's going to trigger income tax. And sales tax, are my sales of what I'm selling, services or goods or products, are they subject to sales tax in that state? Well, if I sold a certain amount of goods in that state over a certain amount, boom, I'm subject to sales tax in that state, okay, without even having a physical presence. So again, these are some of the triggers that we see. Now, site visits, project inspections. Well, what does that look like? Well, the main thing is with a site visit or a project inspection or things like that, that's really going to give you a physical presence again in that state. And again, what did I say the first thing a physical presence is going to do? It's going to trigger sales tax, right? So again, if you're selling goods or services that are subject to sales tax, you're going to get hit up on that one. The other thing are wages and payroll, right? What does that look like if I send someone into a state for a site visit for, say, a week or even maybe a day? Okay, what does that look like from the payroll perspective? Well, the general rule is that when someone works in a specific state, those are that state's wages. So say I'm here located in Alabama, but if I'm going to travel to Pennsylvania and work in Pennsylvania for 2 days or 3 days or a day, I'm working in the state of Pennsylvania. So guess what? Those are Pennsylvania state wages. Now I have Alabama wages and I have Pennsylvania wages, okay? And that's part of the payroll perspective on site visits and project inspections, along with having that physical presence can trigger all these other taxes as well. So as you can see, there's a lot of things that can trigger a lot of these different taxes in these states. So a couple other ones, we're going to mention and probably go through pretty quickly here. Installation of products or goods. Again, I kind of equate that with that site visits, project inspections. When you're going into a state and you're doing an installation of a product that you may have manufactured, or you're delivering kitchen equipment and you're going to do the installation for the restaurant. Again, now you have people working in that state. Okay, one, you got the physical presence. Again, two, you probably have the payroll matter. Okay, and then three, depending on the state and its income tax rules, you may have the income tax issue as well. So again, these, to be repetitive, these are things that you need to look out for when you look at the activities of your business and when you're going into other states, and understanding that when you do one of these things, it can trigger 3 different types of taxes, state taxes, many different types of state taxes in that state, and that you're going to have the corresponding registrations to comply in those states. So again, I think having the physical presence with it, whether it be real or personal property, whether you have inventory in a state, I think a lot of remote sellers have seen and hired marketplace facilitators, and these folks have placed inventory across the United States, unbeknownst to maybe the business owner. And a lot of those states have said, well, you got property in our state, physical presence, you're deemed to be doing business. Now you have a income tax filing requirement, potential legal registrations and income tax registrations and what have you. Also renting. If you rent any type of storage space, warehousing, anything like that in the state will do the same thing. So moving along to digital goods, again, depending on the state, this can trigger, obviously, potential sales tax issues, income tax issues, a variety of issues. Same with software as a service. If you say, oh, I'm just doing software as a service, that's not going to impact me, but it does. Generally, your sales are sourced to where the user is getting the service from. So I may have a server sitting here in the state of Alabama. The person accessing it may be located in Nebraska. What does that look like? Does that pull me in for income tax purposes? Do I have an income tax registration? Do I have a sales tax issue? Am I pulled in for sales tax purposes? And am I pulled in for any other type of taxes in that state? And being aware of that and understanding that is a big problem if you don't. So it's very important. Same with internet sales. Again, we see that with the remote sellers. And what I've been talking about a little bit here regarding the triggers on qualified or the authority to do business. So say that I want to work in a specific state, so I go ahead and I qualify to do business in that state legally. Well, some states say that if you've qualified to do business in their state from a legal perspective, that can create an income tax filing requirement and a potential income tax registration. So if you're going out there and saying, look, I'm authorized to do business in all 50 states, look at me, yahoo. Well, what does that do, right? Have you triggered any tax filing requirements, tax registrations? Same thing with professional licenses. Generally, if you go in and you obtain a professional license in a specific state, some of those states require you now to file an income tax return because they figure that, look, you got a professional license here, you're operating here. I don't know if you have a customer or not a customer, but that's going to more than likely trigger a state filing requirement. Single member LLCs and Q subs, disregarded entities. If those businesses are operating, if you have a single member LLC or a Q sub that's operating in a specific state, that's going to create filing requirements for the owner. So just be aware of that. And then also, if your company has an ownership in a partnership, an LLC, or some type of a joint venture, their activity and you being just a partner can pull you in to those other states and create additional state registration and compliance requirements. So now I know this is not an all-inclusive list, but we just want to touch on a couple of the ones that we see most often. And Kim, I'm not sure if there's any comments or anything you wanted to add to this before we move on to our polling question.
I don't think so, other than just be aware. Be aware when you go through life and through the year, if you may be doing something at the company level that can trigger some kind of registration requirement or a filing requirement.
Yes, and Kim's going to be talking to us about some registrations, the legal registrations through professional licensing registrations, as well as some of the tax registrations that are there. And then we're going to run through an example, and then we'll provide some solutions and resources for you. But with that, we're going to go ahead and launch our first polling question. And Kaylee, can you get that set for us? And it is, does your company have any of the mentioned triggers that could create a state registration requirement, whether that be a sales tax, whether that could be an income tax, payroll tax, etc.?
Alrighty, so the poll is open and just about 80% of the crowd has participated already, so that is wonderful. Everybody's wide awake this afternoon. I'll wait a few more seconds for everybody to cast their vote here. And here's your first reminder that we need you to answer these CPE poll questions in order to get that CPA. Sorry about that. And we're just about at 90% participation. So I'm going to go ahead and close and share the results for everybody to see how their peers have voted. And it looks like 79% say yes, followed by 14% that say maybe, 4% aren't sure, and then 3% saying no.
Okay, well, very good. I know in this day and age, a lot of companies are traveling across state lines and doing a variety types of different business activities and services. So yeah, I wouldn't have expected anything less on that yes answer. So with that, Kim, I'm going to hand it off to you, and you can go ahead and take it away with registrations.
Well, thanks, and thanks for going through the triggers. You did a great job explaining, excuse me, some of the things that may create a registration requirement and something to at least think about or consider. And as Karen mentioned, there are several types of registrations. The first one is legal. So in listening to the triggers, or maybe if you're thinking about hiring a remote employee, or sending people into a particular state, well, now you need to think about, okay, what does that look like from registrations? What do I need to do? So from the legal registration side of things, that is, as Karen mentioned, the registration for the authority to conduct business in the state. And that is your legal right. You're there legally to do business in the state. The state knows you're there and you have access to the legal system. Now, as part of that process, the state will require you to have a registered agent in the state. That's a physical location and a body in the state. It's usually not an employee. It's usually somebody else, a third party that does that. And they're there to receive any type of official or legal documents on your behalf. Now, if you are looking to get a professional license, or if you're in a professional service industry, you may need to have a professional license in the state. So what does that look like? Well, anybody who's jumped through these hoops knows that it can be quite complicated. Many states have specific entity structure requirements or entity ownership requirements. Who can be an owner of this entity? What kind of professional licensing must each owner have, if any? So those are the kind of things you need to look at. And hopping back up to the authority to conduct business in a state. If you have a professional service name, part of your name, for example, you're an engineering firm and you have engineering in your name or architecture in your name, then even though you may not be looking to perform professional services in a state, for example, you're just hiring a remote worker who's going to do accounting or HR, not provide any type of professional services, but merely by the fact you have a professional service in your name, engineering or architect or whatever, then the state still may require you to jump through all the entity structure hoops and the entity ownership hoops. Now, not every state, but some of them. So just be aware that registering to hire a remote employee may not be quite as simple as you initially thought it might be. And again, there may be state and local operating business licenses that you may need to get. So that's just something to be aware. Just the state or the local jurisdiction may want to know that you're there as well. Now, as far as tax registrations, and this is the one people are most familiar with. So if you get an employee, a remote employee in a state, well then, again, you're going to have to register for the payroll withholding, unemployment compensation. Now, some of the local jurisdictions may have payroll withholding as well. So there may be a registration at the local level. And then you may have a sales tax or an excise tax registration requirement. For income tax, many states do require that you separately register with the Department of Revenue. Now, some states, if you register with the Secretary of State, that will automatically register with the Department of Revenue for income tax, or the state may not require anything. Also, some states, as soon as you register or as soon as you file an income tax return, then it's a deemed registration, and then you'll be registered going forward. So you may or may not have a separate income tax registration requirement. There may be a registration requirement for the gross receipts, the margin tax, personal property tax. If you're in one of those states where you have that still has a personal property tax, which I know there's gone in a lot of the northeastern states, but still going strong in the South and in the Midwest. So you may have to register with a county, because a lot of the personal property taxes are administered by counties, some by states, but mostly by counties. And then unclaimed property may have a separate registration requirement or may not. It just depends. So once you've decided, or let's say going through all these, you think, oh goodness, I should have been filing. I should have registered and been filing an income tax return for several years. Do not start filing. Just start filing. Don't do that. Don't do that. So there are some remedies that are available. We've dealt with a lot of voluntary disclosure agreements through voluntary disclosure program and been very successful with that. And what happens with a voluntary disclosure program, normally you can come forward anonymously and just say, hey, we have a company that wants to get current with all their taxes, or with their income tax, or with their sales tax. And the state will say, great, we're going to limit the look back to 3 or 4 years. You don't have to file back to whenever you should have started filing. And then you only have to pay interest, no penalties. So this is a great option. And we encourage a lot of companies who are trying to get current and get into compliance to consider that. An amnesty program is typically for a limited window and for a limited tax type. For example, a state will have an amnesty program for income tax or sales tax for 3 months only. So a lot of times you can't come forward anonymously. You have to disclose right out of the gate. And also with that, they may waive the interest and the penalty. So that's good, but just be aware that's sometimes an option. Now, some companies like to file, the remedy being the Get Caught program, which means as soon as they catch me, I'll start filing, which this isn't necessarily the best option. If you've gone back a lot of years, you should have been filing, and you get caught, then technically they can go back clear to when you should have started filing. A lot of times they limit it to 7 to 10 years, but you will have to pay all the tax, the interest, and the penalties, which can get quite costly. So again, just don't start filing. If you think you may have a little bit of a problem or some exposure, then give us a call and we'll just talk through the remedies and talk about your specific situation.
Yeah.
And Karen, now go through an example for us, or do you want to talk about the remedies first? Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, we're good on those. I think we try to hound dog those on you every state and local seminar or webinar we provide. So hopefully a lot of you are very familiar with those options. And as Kim said, the Get Caught program is probably not necessarily the best. It's good to know where you are, where you're compliant, where you may not be compliant, and worth getting cleaned up and corrected in that specific state. So with that, we're going to move on to an example regarding registrations. And we had presented this example in a couple webinars a while back. And so some of you, if you've joined us previously, you may be familiar with this one, but we're gonna look at it from a different perspective now. But we're gonna go through this and really, what does it look like hiring a remote employee in Oregon? And for those folks that may be attending from the state of Oregon, hopefully, it's not all inclusive, so we may have missed some things. So don't hold that against us, but we just really want to cover a majority of these items because, and we weren't just picking on your state. We just felt that there was a lot going on there. So with that, we'll go ahead. So hiring a remote employee in Oregon. So first of all, as Kim mentioned, we have to look at it from the legal perspective. Just because if we have an employee in the state, something happens to that employee while they're working on the company's behalf, and we need access to the legal system. If the state doesn't know we're there, then more than likely we're not going to be afforded that legal protection. Okay, so mainly when you do hire a remote employee in a state, you would register for the authority to do business. As Kim mentioned, once you register for the authority to do business, you should have a registered agent that's located in that state to receive any type of legal documents or be able to handle any type of legal matters for the company in that state. If you are a professional and you require professional licensing, this is when you'd register for any type of applicable professional licensing. As Kim mentioned, having engineer in your name or architecture in your name or something else dependent upon that state and what their state requirements are, you may have specific things that you must do then. As well as making sure you remain in good standing legally in that state. Many states require the annual reports and those filing requirements. So from a legal perspective, you're going to have to register for the authority to do business, make sure you have a registered agent in the state, register for any type of applicable professional licensing, and then also continue filing any type of annual reports based on that state's requirements. And then the next thing is once we get that taken care of, then we look at the tax side, right? So the biggest thing is payroll. So we got to, because it's a remote employee, we got to register for payroll taxes, right? So we have to register for state income tax withholding. And as you can see, there's a bunch of other taxes or registration taxes here, and you're like, well, what are all these things? Well, every state has its own types of taxes that they may implement and require registrations for. And some of Oregon's are listed here. They have a statewide transit tax. You have a transit payroll excise tax if you're operating in the tri-metropolitan area or the Lane Transit District. They just implemented the Oregon Paid Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program. And these might be withholding requirements on behalf of the employer. They may also be taxes that an employee must have withheld from their pay. But anyway, these are some of the things that you have to be aware of and make sure that you're either registering for. You may not have to register for all of these, but that comes along with that whole background of having that remote employee and making sure that you're registered for payroll taxes. And then some of the common ones that we're most familiar with are the state unemployment insurance, unemployment compensation, and then your workers' comp insurance policy. Maybe workers' comp insurance is not necessarily a registration, but you need to make sure that your current workers' compensation policy will cover an employee located in Oregon or other states. Certain states require a separate policy for an employee in their state. Not all, and generally, if you do have a good workers' comp insurance policy, generally that will cover a majority of your employees wherever located. But that's just something there that goes along with this whole payroll tax issue. Again, register for sales tax if applicable. With that remote employee being in the state, you have a physical presence in that state, you're automatically required for sales tax if you sell goods or services that may be subject to sales tax. And then let's look at the business tax side of things, right? What does Oregon look like for business taxes and registrations? Well, Oregon imposes a business income excise tax, okay? So tax registration there. Oregon also has a corporate activity tax, maybe another registration. And then any type of business, operating business licenses, personal property returns, you generally see the personal property returns in the Southeast. No longer do you see them mainly in the Northeast, but they're still spread around the Midwest and the West Coast, and then also unclaimed property. And these may require registrations with the local jurisdictions. You know, with remote employees regarding a business licenses, some states may have something called a home occupancy license, where they're working from home in a local jurisdiction. So beware of those rules too, because you say, oh yeah, we're not operating there, I just have an employee there, who cares, you know, it doesn't matter. Well, it may. And making sure that you understand, you know, what the types of taxes you may be subject to in that state just by hiring a remote employee is extremely important, so that you are in compliance and that you're able to make sure you hit all the necessary things that are required. So, and then don't forget your local stuff. I mean, I know we mentioned a little bit of local on the last slide, but again, the city of Portland, Multnomah County, they do have a lot of different local business taxes that come into play there in Oregon. But again, this is hiring a remote employee, and you can see the volume of potential registrations that you may have just from hiring a remote employee in a state. And I know we used the Oregon example, but if you're going and hiring somebody in the state of Washington or the state of Massachusetts, you know, you really need to be aware of, what does that look like for me, the employer? And then two, also, what does that impact on the employee? And consider all those things. So again, as I mentioned, it's not all inclusive. Hopefully we did those folks attending from Oregon well in this. And, you know, if you do have any comments, please put them in our survey. We'd love to hear them. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next polling question. Does your company have an ownership in a partnership, LLC, or joint venture? And Kaylee, if you could set that poll for us.
Absolutely. So the poll is open. And just about half the crowd has already participated. So I'll leave the poll open until about 85% participation, or if a minute elapses, whichever comes first. And here is your second reminder that if you need that CPE to be answering our polls this afternoon. All right. So about 85% of the crowd has participated. So I'm going to go ahead and close and share the results with everybody to see. And 54% said no, 37% said yes, 6% said not sure, and 3% said maybe.
Okay, thanks you. I think Karen may be muted, so I'll just go ahead and start talking. Thank you, Kaylee, for that.
Yeah, sorry about that, Kim.
We saw your lips going. I can't really read them. You're sort of small, but
yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay. That happens. I just want to make sure my dog doesn't start barking. But anyway, yeah. Well, Kim, go ahead, take it away with some of our registration solutions that we have on deck here.
Well, Karen and I meet with a lot of companies, and since we've been working together here at Stanbond S for the last several years, we've met with companies across about every industry type you can imagine. We've dealt with service companies, with manufacturers, with software as a service companies, retailers, all over the board. And what we're hearing from all of them is exactly the same across all the industries, and that this registration process and then the management of the registration and keeping compliant with the registrations once they're done is a headache. It's a time-consuming, necessary evil for doing business, and we get that. And so we've spent the last year and a half trying to figure out what are good solutions, what options are available to a business to manage these, to get the registrations, to manage them, and then to stay compliant. Well, starting with the legal, you know, as we already mentioned, you're going to have to do the register for the authority to do business in the state, have a registered agent in the state. You may need to change a registered agent, and then you're going to need to do the annual reports every year. So what are the solutions for this? Well, you can do it in-house. You have somebody designated that this is their job to manage all these. Also, we know companies that use attorneys to do this, which is great. This is definitely in their wheelhouse, all being legal, for them to handle this. And now we just wanted to let you know that Stand By Nest can now assist you in this area. We are powered by Harbor Compliance, and we can assist. You know, Karen and I consult with a lot of companies on determining where they should be filing and where they need to become compliant. And now Stand By Nest can just take the next step in that process and assist you with the registration. We can provide you with registered agent services in the state. And then also, we have a service called Managed Annual Report Service, which basically allows you to outsource the annual report filings to Stand By Nest and Harbor Compliance to go ahead and do these on your behalf. So you make sure that they're current and you don't have to worry about them.
Yeah.
Now, with the oh, go ahead.
Real quick, Kim, on that. And as Kim mentioned, you know, this is just an extension of the services that Stand By Nest can provide currently. And you may already be getting this from another third-party source, but Kim and I saw this as a great need, you know, with clients, because as soon as they come and we're consulting with some certain clients or what have you, and they have said, okay, well, how do I get registered? You know, what do I need to do? And so we saw that as a need. And we want to provide solutions for our clients. And this is one that we felt was very necessary and needed by many. So go ahead, Kim.
Okay, so now we'll move on to the the professional licensing, which, you know, any of you who have done any type of professional licensing know it can be rather simple, or it can be a nightmare and a time-consuming, tedious process. So again, you can have your attorney help with this, which they may or may not do this, or you can have an internal person, maybe who is starting to understand or is familiar with the professional licensing issues and how that all works. And now, again, Stand By Nest is able to help you with this, and we can help you get your initial firm license. You know, all the hoops you have to jump through. And with our resources, we have people that do this in all 50 states every day, and they have connections at the professional licensing boards, and that can make this a smoother process and maybe even expedite it somewhat. Sometimes the state boards only meet 3 or 4 times a year, and you're stuck on their timetable. But we do have the experience that we can help with that. And then, similar to the state SOS registrations, there's managed professional licenses, which again would allow us to take care of making sure your annual firm licenses are filed timely and that you stay current. So that's another to take something off your plate, to free you up to do other things. And now for tax solutions. And again, this is something like for the payroll matters, your payroll company may do for you. I don't know if an attorney would do this, or again, a designated person within your company, or now Stand By Nest can just, you know, you let us know you need a payroll registration and we can help you with that. Same with the income tax, sales tax, unemployment, all the various taxes we can help with. Now, whether you are doing it internally, using your CPA, using your attorney, or maybe using Stand By Nest, we also have some great solutions for managing all these once you have your registrations. The first one I want to talk about is Entity Manager, and that's a tool that allows you to manage your Secretary of State registrations. It's a dashboard, and it goes out and pings all the Secretary of State websites and automatically populates. So it shows where your company is registered, the current status, whether you're in good standing or maybe you're not in good standing, the next due date of your annual report, and there are links to get you straight to where you file your annual report if you're handling that yourself. It's a great tool, very helpful, and you can share, give access to that to your attorney, to any particular people or owners that you think need access to see that. A records manager is something, sort of what it says, it's a place you can park all your business records, for example, your corporate minutes, your articles of organization or your operating agreement, maybe your S-election or your EIN, things like that. You can put all those important documents in one place. So, you know, usually there's one keeper of the documents, and if they leave or something happens to them, then they're in one place where everybody can find them that needs to have them. Tax Manager allows you to maybe track all the filings that you're doing, business licenses, income tax, estimated tax payments, track all your individual state assigned numbers, which are always important. And License Manager is an excellent tool if you have professional licenses. For example, you can track your firm licenses, where they're located, when they're due, the renewals. You can track your qualifiers. You can track all the individual firm licenses, all the individual licenses you have within the firm. Also, if something happens and your qualifier leaves or retires, it will let you know, hey, you need to find another qualifier in your state because you've lost your qualifier and you must have one in the state. So a great tool to help you with that. And then there's a research engine that allows you to research what the architectural and engineering professional license requirements are in each state. And we've talked about those. For example, the requirements for entity structure, ownership. Now, we're just offering or showing you different solutions are available. There is not one perfect answer for every type of registration, tax or legal and professional licenses, or for every single company. You know your company best. What we encourage you to do is just do a cost benefit analysis, just like you would for any expenditure making for the company. What makes the most sense? And also one that we look at a lot, what's the highest and best use of your people? Does it make sense to have somebody managing all these things where they could be doing something that's going to generate revenue, perhaps, maybe do sales calls, or maybe do customer service, or maybe assist with some professional service? Is this something that maybe you could leverage, or maybe it's perfect just the way you have it with somebody internally doing it? But we just wanted to make you aware of resources so that you can make an informed decision. Karen, did you have anything you want to add?
Yeah. No, I think that's great, Kim, because I think, as we mentioned, with all the various triggers and understanding all the taxes or the onslaught of taxes that you can occur from a state perspective, that being able to understand where is my sales tax number for this state, or where's my income tax number for this state, and knowing where you are. Did we register to do business in that state, or did we not yet? Oh yeah, I think we did. Well, why are we registered in this state? Who did that? And we see that a lot with some of the services that we're providing now, is that, we look at that entity manager, and that is real time, and it goes out and it does ping everything. It's a great tool to have, and we'll let some of our clients know and say, well, look, did you know you're registered in the state of Maryland? They're like, no, but that's why I've been getting all those notices, that I didn't know why I was getting all these notices. So the thing is that, making sure that you understand and using these solutions and resources that are available out there, whether that be through Harbor Compliance or a different third party, if they have, the equal type of packages that are there. But it's mainly really to get a grasp and a hold on what you're doing in these states and the different taxes that you're subject to in those various states. So no, I think that's very good. And again,
Karen, one more thing. The other thing we hear a lot, if something happens to somebody, there's key employees who typically have managed your SOS registrations or your professional licenses for a lot of years. Well, if they all of a sudden retire, or something happens to them, or they leave the company, is there somebody that can quickly step into place? Where is all the information? Is it all in their head, or is it out there where somebody else can step in and replace them? So this is sort of something that helps in that gap as well.
Yeah. And trying to do this, unless you hire somebody full time, as Kim mentioned, it's a big task, especially if you're operating in a number of states. And hiring remote employees, or your customers are throughout the United States, or what you may be doing. So I mean, it is good, some good solutions there. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and move on to our I think it's our third polling question. And is your company registered with the Secretary of State in each state your company does business? So we'll be interested to see what this one looks like, Kim. And Kaylee, if you can launch that poll, that would be great.
Absolutely. The poll is launched, and we already have about 65% that have voted. So I'll give you a few more seconds here and then close the poll. This is your third reminder to answer these polls so you can get that CPE credit. Alrighty, 85% of the crowd has participated, so I'm going to go ahead and close and share the results with everybody. All right. right, 56% of the crowd says yes, 24% say not sure, 11% say some, and 9% say no.
Okay, well, I'm really happy to hear that a majority of the participants today knows that their company is registered where they're doing business. So that's a very good sign. So anyway, with that, Kim, you had any comments on that poll answer, or you're good?
I'm good.
All right, well, then we're going to go ahead and move on and talk about some strategies, okay? So what do we do with all this? How do we try to manage everything that we're dealing with? And I call it the 4 C's, and you'll see we're going to go through these. I know 2 are showing up here, but some of the strategies you can remember with the 4 C's, and they are, first is communicate. 1, we need to make sure everybody's on the same page. Finance may not find out that we now have a customer in, Ohio. When did that happen? They're probably the last people to know, right? Same with sales and HR. HR may hire the remote employee. Well, finance didn't know about that. And so it's like they're scrambling to try to get the registrations and get everything done. So, the biggest thing across any organization is, as we all know, no matter what it is communication. And making sure that everybody is on the same page with, 1, what we're doing, and that we're communicating things in a timely fashion to be certain that we can get things set up. The last thing you want to do is sign off on a contract in a state and then not have your professional licensing, or, it may take 6 months to register for the authority to do business in that state. And things like that. You don't want to be working from behind. You always want to be working on the front end of everything. And the main thing is making sure those lines of communication are always open, and that, your operations, your salespeople, your HR, and your finance team are always communicating and talking with one another about things, especially when it comes to working outside of your home state. The second C is create policies and procedures. One of the things is, obtaining new customers or projects. Everybody's real excited about getting that customer over in California. We're going to make a ton of money on that. That looks great. My sales guys are all happy. Everybody's good. But, what does that really look like for the company? Are we going to have to send employees there? If we send employees there, is that going to create payroll issues? Are we going to have an income tax filing requirement? Do we have to get professional licensing? Do we have to have the legal authority now? What does that all look like when we get a new client or a new customer in another state? Understanding the taxation of that state, the little local nuances of that state, and any other type of taxes that state may impose is really important on the front end, because that large profit margin that you just thought you were going to have may now be dwindled down to a small amount because of all the compliance and all the costs for registration and all the internal resources being used or consumed. So, again, create policies and procedures when we're looking and obtaining new customers and projects in other states. Maybe if we do that, maybe we say, hey, before we accept that, we need to look at that. And maybe we can build put some of that cost to comply or operating in that state into the bid of that project. Hiring new employees. Kim and I have dealt with a number of clients that say, Karen, Kim, what does it look like to hire an employee in Boston, Massachusetts? We just went through the Oregon example. What does that look like? Maybe we look to talent, within the states we may currently have employees, or states that we're currently operating in, versus going outside into a brand new state we haven't ventured through yet. Maybe create policies and procedures on how and where we hire new employees and what states we're looking at. Now, of course, if the talent is so great, obviously, you don't want to not hire the person, but make sure that you understand what that's going to encompass and what other state taxes may come along with that person. A big one that we've also seen is the movement of employees, or the transition to be a remote employee, and then also hiring a remote employee and then quitting after several months or a couple months. So again, having a policy and procedures of, we had a client that a staff or a senior level employee wanted to move to Hawaii. Well, what does that do to the company? Okay, what does that do to the company? Now the company's going to have to file Hawaii business returns. They're subject to the Hawaii general excise taxes and an onslaught of other taxes that may come on to them. So really understand it's not just hiring somebody and employing somebody in a specific state. There's a lot more that comes along with that, not just the payroll perspective. Even the compensation levels, you know, the cost of living in Hawaii versus the cost of living in another state here. What does that look like? Are they going to want a new salary? You know, do they want a bump in pay? You know, what does all that look like? And then also, if you're hiring a remote employee, you know, do we have a policy that says, you know, hey, you must stay on with the firm for a year, or you must do this, or something? But I think to protect your business, that you should create some policies and procedures regarding a lot of these things, because it is costly for a business to just start in a state and handle all the compliance. And then, you know, there's that meme out there that if you think that the cost to comply is a lot, well, the cost of non-compliance is greater. So, you know, keep that in mind when you're going through some of these things. So the next C is comply. You know, comply. Kim mentioned a lot of registration solutions and resources for the management of registrations and licensing. Is, you know, you got to comply with all of it, right? You got to make sure you have something at the end of the day that I can comply. It's great to sign up with everything, but how do I comply going forward? What do I need? What tools do I need? What resources do I need? Who can help me? Who can assist? So comply. And the last C is considerations. You know, when you're considering all this kind of stuff as a strategy, you know, consider the people or property that you may have in a new state. You know, consider the taxability of your services and goods related to sales tax purposes. You know, understand and consider what are my tax responsibilities going to be in that state. Am I going to need operating or business licenses? And what does it look like from a compliance reporting standpoint? You got to consider all these things, and then, you know, use some of those strategies regarding, you know, comply, creating policies and procedures and communication. You know, put all that together in a package so that, you know, you have a plan. You have something to go to and look at. So with that, we put together kind of an annual checklist. And Kim, do you want to go through that annual checklist based on some of the things we talked about today? You there, Kim?
You're on mute, Kim.
Sorry, you can't read my list. I don't understand. Sorry about that. So again, this is a checklist that sort of summarizes all the triggers we've talked about today. And while it's important to go through them throughout the year and as things change during the year, we really encourage companies to look at these, you know, the last quarter of the year as you're rolling into year end and getting ready for the tax return process and all that. So, you know, just take inventory. Where do you have SOS registrations? Where are your professional licenses? Do you have property or people in a state? Do you have people going into different states, maybe for a conference or salespeople, or maybe for site visits? How are you attributing? How are you sourcing all your sales? And that would be for the tax return purposes. Is the company using independent contractors? Are you using for installation or for sales or for maybe professional services within a state? What are you doing? And then again, if you own something, if the company owns something, do you have a Q sub, or do you have possibly a single member LLC in the state? You know, is that going to create a filing requirement or create something for you, a registration requirement of some sort? And also, if the company owns a partnership or is involved in a joint venture or an LLC, does that create something? So these are things we encourage you really just to take a look at. Keep this handy in your little year-end checklist file so that you just sort of take a look at it, because, you know, if you see, oh, hey, I've got a new SOS registration, what does that mean? And then, you know, you let your CPA know, you give Karen or me a call and say, what does this mean? What do I need to do now? We're happy to help with that. And Karen, I think you were going to talk about our or services where people can, if they just want to call for a quick complimentary call?
Yes, most definitely. And this can be overwhelming to any business owner, finance team, what have you. There's so many things that can pull you into a state for tax purposes, and then understanding what do I need to do. And again, not even just the tax purposes, but the legal aspect. You know, what am I required to do? And it's a lot to know in addition to all the other work that you do. So you know, Kim and I here are resources. And again, if you do have any questions, Kim and I generally provide, you know, if you have questions, we generally provide a half-an-hour complimentary call if you wanted to talk about any issues or any matters or where you stand, and then maybe, you know, work toward getting a game plan together and how you want to approach things. But part of the things that we like to do is always have solutions for our clients or folks that we talk with. And we talk with a number of clients that have other CPAs that do their work and things like that. But we want to make sure that we can offer our consulting services to everyone and anyone that has these needs. And again, a big part of our presentation today is to let you know that we do have those solutions and resources, which we're powered by Harbor Compliance, to provide those solutions to you, or that assistance to you in managing, you know, our state legal registrations, our state tax registrations, as well as some tidbits of information as to what's going to trigger me in regards to all of this in these states, right? And then also, you know, a couple of things here on strategies of how, you know, we can kind of bring this in and make it a little bit more manageable, you know, when we're discussing new clients, or we're discussing hiring a remote employee, or what we choose to do across state lines, or entering a specific state, or joining that partnership. And you know, the thing is one thing that we want to say too: don't let tax wag the dog, right? Do not do things because you don't want to pay taxes. The thing is do great things. You know, tax is a side thing that needs to be complied with and taken care of. But to be able to, you know, comply and takes care of that, use the solutions and resources that are out there and that can help you as a company move forward. So with that, I know this was a lot of information, but we always have our favorite thing of our state and local tax webinars. We always bring a kind of a fun map for everyone. So we're going to go ahead and show you that map, and then I guess have at it to celebrate, I guess, kind of the coming to the end of summer. But what we have here is a map of, I think, some of unique flavors of ice cream. I think, you know, my favorite here is strawberry. I'm kind of plain, but I guess I need to either cross the state line to Georgia or Florida to get that. So go ahead and Kaylee, if you want to launch the poll, we'll let our attendees today, you know, kind of pick out what is their favorite ice cream flavor. So there we go. And I can bring up the map again if y'all like to see that.
All right, the poll is launched, and this is my favorite part. I love that you guys do this. All right, 80% of the crowd has participated, so I'll give you a few more seconds here to cast your votes. And if you're of the people that are selecting brownie/other, let us know what the other is. I'm curious about it.
Yes, most definitely.
Here is the results. So it looks like cookie dough and brownie/other is tied there. 22% say mint chocolate chip, 12% say coffee, and 15% are right there with you, Karen, with strawberry.
Yeah, no, I don't know what it is. I love the strawberry, but I'm interested to see what some of those other flavors are. And I knew mint chocolate chip and cookie dough may be up there, but I was curious about the coffee. I thought maybe we'd have a lot of coffee folks out there. So Kim, did you have a favorite on here?
Of all those, I'd probably go with the brownie. I love my chocolate.
All right. Well, really good. Very good. Well, thank you all for attending today's presentation. Kim, was there anything that you wanted to add before we sign out for the day?
No, but feel free if you have any questions that come to mind when you get the survey, pop those in the survey. Karen and I will get back to you and let you know to answer your question. And also, if you're interested in just calling and chat with us, we'd love to meet you. Just email us. Our contact information is in the webinar. You can reach out to us, and we'll be happy to set up a time to talk.
Yeah, and again, thank you all for attending today's presentation. And as Kim mentioned, please feel free to reach out at your convenience with any questions or any comments that you may have. So with that, thank you very much and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.